Rick remembered the moment clearly, waking up on the kitchen floor after being knocked down, hearing the words, "Old enough to talk to me like a man, old enough to get your ass beat like one." Moments like that shaped him, but they were only the start of a life filled with pain, loss, risk, and eventual success. Years later, Rick Harrison would build a huge car collection worth millions. More than 30 classic vehicles filled his garages. His prized 1940 Chevy Deluxe sat beside Ferraris, NASCAR tribute cars, and rare machines most people only dream of owning. But even that success couldn't protect him forever. Slowly, the bills started stacking up, $65,000 every month in alimony payments, legal battles, and even a lawsuit from his own mother for $500,000. The legal fees alone were crushing. By 2025, something in Rick changed. People in the car world noticed he wasn't buying the way he used to. He turned down a Ferrari priced at $100,000, a car he would have bought immediately in the past. He started offering low numbers on vehicles he once would have paid full value for. Everyone began wondering what was really happening behind the fortune people knew from television. The truth was that Rick's life had never been simple, even long before fame. When he was 8 years old, his world fell apart. One night in 1973, he was lying in bed at home in San Diego when his head suddenly started buzzing, loud and painful like tangled power lines. His body froze, and his tongue tore against his teeth until it felt like raw meat. When the seizure ended, he couldn't even stand. Doctors said he had focal onset aware seizures, but to Rick, it meant pain, fear, and exhaustion. The seizures came every month for the next 10 years. They damaged his muscles so badly that sometimes he couldn't get out of bed for weeks. Ice packs were wrapped around his legs just so he could sleep. Some years, he missed more than 200 days of school. While other kids played baseball or rode bikes, Rick lived between hospital visits and long, silent afternoons waiting for the next seizure to hit. With no sports and no social life, Rick turned to books. His mom brought him the Great Brain series from the library, and he became obsessed with the character Tom, a clever boy who always found ways to make money in small-town Utah. Rick read all 8 books in less than 2 weeks. He wanted to be like Tom. He wanted to win, to outsmart the world that kept knocking him down. Soon, he discovered history books too. By age 12, he was reading about old battles, ancient coins, and naval warfare from the 1700s. While he was trapped inside his room, sweating from seizures, he unknowingly trained his mind for the job he would one day become famous for. He learned to notice small details. He remembered everything he read. He trained his brain to see value in things most people overlooked. But life at school was brutal. At Taft Middle School, kids mocked him endlessly. They teased him for missing class, for looking pale, for twitching during seizures, and for being different. He lived in constant fear of collapsing in front of everyone. So he stayed quiet, kept his head down, and studied people instead of talking to them. Every insult became a lesson. Every lonely lunch taught him to read faces, judge tone, and understand human behavior. What others saw as bullying, he turned into survival training. Then everything collapsed at home. In 1981, when Rick was 16, his mother's real estate business fell apart. She had been doing well during the 1970s, but when the recession hit, interest rates shot up to 18%, and the housing market died. Rick's father had just left the Navy after 20 years to help with the business, but the timing was terrible. The family lost $1 million and was left with only $5,000 in the bank. With nothing left to hold on to, they packed their things and moved to Las Vegas, hoping for a fresh start. By then, Rick had already dropped out of the 10th grade. School didn't interest him anymore. He was making $2,000 a week selling fake Gucci bags in the San Diego garment district. Today that would be more than $7,000 a week. He was only 15. He bought bags for $30 and sold them for $300. When competition showed up, he switched to fake jeans. He built a small underground business while most kids his age were still hanging out at arcades. His father was furious that he quit school, but he couldn't deny the money. The hustle lasted nearly 2 years before the market dried up. When it ended, Rick immediately started looking for the next opportunity. In 1982, something life-changing happened. His girlfriend Kim became pregnant, but tragedy struck when she had a miscarriage. Most teenage relationships would not survive a loss like that, but Rick and Kim married anyway. A few months later, she became pregnant again. Their son Corey was born on April 27, 1983, when Rick was only 18. 2 years later, their second son, Adam, was born. But raising 2 babies with almost no money eventually became impossible. In 1985, Kim left, dropping the boys off and never returning. Rick was just 20 years old, now a single father with 2 toddlers, a stack of unpaid bills, and almost no support. He pawned his comic book collection just to keep the electricity on. Las Vegas didn't make things easy either. Rick did whatever he could to survive. He sold bootleg VHS tapes. He flipped cars through questionable deals. In one wild stunt, he used a winch truck to pull a car out of a dealership service bay and drove away like it belonged to him. He got arrested for selling fake designer goods. He ran scams on newspaper routes. It was not glamorous, but every day of struggle sharpened him. He learned how people lie, how people panic, how people negotiate, and how desperate people behave. All of those lessons would eventually help him build an empire. Back in the hospital waiting rooms, Rick had discovered something special when he was 12, antique coins. He remembered picking up a Civil War-era coin and feeling something click inside him. He liked the weight, the texture, the story behind each piece of metal. He began buying more. He studied everything about coins, how they were made, how patina formed, how to identify fakes, and how to judge age just by the feel. His perfect memory and his love of history blended with his street smarts. He became a rare mix of charm, intelligence, and sharp instinct. Part of his resilience came from a tragedy his family rarely talked about. Rick had lost his sister Sherry when he was still a toddler. She was 6 when she passed away from health complications. The grief changed his parents, and even though they didn't talk about it, Rick felt the silence. It taught him that life can end suddenly and without warning. That lesson stayed with him. He learned not to rely on happiness. He always expected disaster, and he always planned for it. That mindset is why he didn't collapse when life got hard in 1981. Instead, he adapted, remembered what he had learned, and rebuilt again. When Rick arrived in Las Vegas at 16, he took whatever jobs he could find. He cleaned tables and washed dishes in a casino for barely over $3 an hour. But at night, he took on something far more dangerous, repossessing cars. He went into rough neighborhoods where one wrong move could get him hurt. Sometimes he earned more money in one night repossessing cars than he did in a whole month cleaning dishes. His parents opened a tiny coin shop on Las Vegas Boulevard. It was only 300 square feet, barely enough space to stand in. That shop is where Rick learned what desperation looked like up close. People came in after losing everything at the casino and pawned wedding rings for $20 loans. Rick memorized their expressions, their body language, their stories. These daily interactions taught him exactly how to judge value and risk. He kept selling fake Gucci bags on the side, making more money than any normal teenager. By 10th grade, he quit school completely. Las Vegas was teaching him faster than any classroom ever could. What Rick really wanted, though, was a pawn license. But Las Vegas only allowed one license per 50,000 residents. The city wasn't big enough yet. So every week, for nearly 2 years, he called the city statistician to check the population numbers. People at City Hall eventually laughed about it, but Rick didn't care. He was waiting for his moment. In 1989, when the population finally hit 250,000, he saw his chance. But other pawn shop owners didn't want competition. They paid politicians to block him. Rick and his father fought back in court, spending $15,000 they barely had. After months of battles, a judge finally shut down the opposition. Rick said it felt like winning the lottery. He opened the first 24-hour pawn shop in America. The shop wasn't safe in those days. Las Vegas was still influenced by the mob. Rick dealt with customers who brought in stolen goods hoping to clean the money. Once, he held a $10,000 Rolex that he knew was probably stolen, and he still paid $500 for it without asking questions. He learned to recognize stolen casino chips and rare mob memorabilia. One time, a loan went bad and the customers returned with weapons. After that, he kept loaded guns behind the counter and hired security. Every transaction came with risk, and Rick lived with that tension daily. One of his biggest breaks came when he bought an old slot machine from the 1930s. The seller claimed it was worth $25,000, but Rick's research told him it was actually a rare prototype worth much more. He borrowed $50,000 against it, almost his entire yearly inventory, and sold it 3 months later for $85,000. That deal saved the shop and built his reputation. At home, life was no easier. After marrying Kim Young, then divorcing, he met Tracy on a blind date and married her in 1986. They blended their families and raised Corey, Adam, and their daughter. Money was tight. Rick worked 16-hour days. At one point, he even sold guns without the proper license, and when some of those guns showed up in violent crimes, the ATF began investigating. He was constantly walking a dangerous line. His marriage to Tracy lasted 25 years, but the early years were filled with stress, kids under 10, endless work, and side hustles just to pay bills. By 1989, he officially became co-owner of the shop at only 24. Business started climbing fast. By 2005, they were lending out $3 million a year and earning $700,000 in interest. But the shop also became a magnet for addicts. People pawned expensive watches just to afford gas home, and most never returned. Rick ended up taking their jewelry, cars, and sometimes even houses because that was how the business worked. It was harsh, but he didn't have the luxury of being soft. In the 1990s, someone brought in what looked like a Confederate sword from Gettysburg that had originally been bought for $75. Rick knew how to check markings and recognize fakes. He realized it wasn't just any sword, it was an 1836 artillery piece. He paid $15,000 for it and later sold it for $75,000. Deals like that built his reputation as someone who understood history, value, and risk. His success grew, but so did the pressure, the legal issues, the financial responsibilities, and the constant challenges. Even as he built a name that would eventually be known around the world, Rick never forgot the pain, the seizures, the losses, and the fights that shaped him into someone who could survive anything. That mix of intelligence, instinct, and hard experience became the foundation of everything he built, and everything he still struggles to hold on to today. The big deal he made early in his career turned him into a respected figure in the pawn world. People began trusting his judgment, especially when it came to historic items. But even with all that new success, things weren't peaceful behind the counter. His father still owned slightly more than half of the business and refused to hand over control. They argued often, especially about risks. One big fight happened when a Ferrari came in from a gambler who had gone bankrupt. The son wanted to take the chance, clean it up, invest in repairs, and try to sell it for a high amount. His father didn't like the gamble, but the son knew how to turn another person's desperation into profit, something he had been doing since he was young. The risk paid off, and it showed him that bold moves could build a future. When the tech bubble burst in 2000, many workers from the technology industry rushed to Las Vegas, pawning whatever they could. The shop owner saw a new direction. Instead of focusing on jewelry or electronics, he put his energy into sports memorabilia. He studied signature patterns, learned how to check for fake autographs, and trained himself to confirm whether a jersey had really been worn in an actual game. One day a man came in with a boxing glove once used by one of the most famous fighters in the world. The seller pawned it for a few $1,000s and never came back. Once the owner confirmed it was genuine, he sold it for much more. That glove helped the shop stay alive during the crash. Years later, he had a large wedding with nearly 200 guests at a beachside ceremony. But the marriage quietly ended a few years later. Court papers showed he had been giving large monthly payments to family members, starting at $25,000, then dropping, and eventually stopping completely. Money became tight enough that he even pawned his own classic car to keep cash flowing. He never believed in signing prenups and always said he would still live comfortably even if someone took half of what he had. But when his marriage ended, he had to rebuild yet again. Then everything changed on the day a television crew filmed a small, ordinary pawn shop in a rough part of Las Vegas. A simple show about people walking in with old items and negotiating prices suddenly became one of the most watched programs in the country. Fans weren't tuning in for explosions or drama, they were watching a calm man with glasses explain the history behind coins, weapons, and strange collectibles. Before the show, the shop might see 50 customers on a busy day. After the show started, the number multiplied, and some days more than 1,000 people walked through the doors. Tourists didn't even come to pawn anything, they just wanted to meet the man from TV. He wasn't an actor. He wasn't dramatic. He simply knew history. He loved explaining where an item came from, why it mattered, and how much it was worth. The show had no script. What viewers saw was exactly what happened in the shop: negotiations, research, humor, and the everyday challenges of running a business built on quick decisions. As the years went by, he earned a large amount every time a new episode aired. The show spread to more than 100 countries, and his face became known around the world. Meanwhile, the neighborhood around the shop grew more valuable, tourists filled the area, and the shop became a major attraction. But while the business looked perfect on television, the family behind it was struggling. A few years after the show became famous, his mother filed a lawsuit against him. She claimed that when her husband was dying, she was pressured into signing documents she did not fully understand. Those papers changed the ownership of the shop and gave her son control. She said the monthly payments she had been receiving suddenly stopped, and that she believed her son was hiding valuable assets. A restraining order was placed, stopping him from selling any business property until the lawsuit could be sorted out. At the same time, his relationship with his own son grew tense. They clashed about business decisions and the direction of the shop. The friendly, cheerful family that viewers loved on TV was beginning to fall apart behind closed doors. Years earlier, he had written a book about his life, explaining how he fell in love with history, math, and the art of negotiating. He described some of the most incredible items that had ever come into the shop, from championship rings to centuries-old weapons. He also explained why he refused to buy certain items, including one of the most infamous cars in American history, a vehicle involved in a slow-speed chase that millions of people had watched on TV decades earlier. Even though he knew the car's value, he didn't want the attention or the trouble it might bring. In the mid-2010s, federal investigators discovered large amounts of silver hidden in a family trust that had not been properly reported. That discovery triggered a full audit. Bank accounts were frozen, documents were seized, and the television network feared that the show, one of its biggest hits, was in danger. Filming nearly stopped. He had to hire lawyers, pay fines, and restructure the business before the catastrophe passed. But then, he pulled off one of the greatest deals of his career. A man brought in what looked like a rocket engine. The seller said it came from old space mission training equipment. Instead of accepting the story, the shop owner checked markings, researched serial numbers, and reached out to archives. He confirmed it was real and bought it for $100,000. Later, he sold it at an auction for over $1 million. That deal proved he wasn't just lucky, he had skill, patience, and years of knowledge. The shop itself had been started by his parents decades earlier. It was small, simple, and not glamorous. His father had spent many years in the military, and his mother quietly handled the books. When the show began, the shop became famous, but fame brought cracks. When his father died, the will revealed a painful family rift. One of the siblings was intentionally cut out without any explanation. Most of the estate went to the widow and the eldest son, which caused even more tension. After the father's death, the widow received monthly payments for a while, then those payments stopped during the early months of the pandemic. She claimed that assets had been hidden from her, and she believed money that belonged to her late husband was missing. A judge ordered the son not to move any business assets while the case continued. A large loan the business had taken out raised even more questions, and the family's problems became public. The shop owner's personal life was also complicated. He had married multiple times and divorced multiple times, each time without a prenup, losing large amounts of money. At one point, he was paying more than $65,000 every month in alimony. He later admitted that he always thought each marriage would last forever, so signing a prenup felt unnecessary. Then the show took another hit. One of the cast members was investigated, and a police raid uncovered drugs, weapons, and suspicious items in that person's house. Viewership fell immediately, and people questioned whether the show could ever recover. The shop owner tried to support his coworker and said he didn't want to judge too early, but the show's reputation took damage. Then, in one of the most heartbreaking moments of his life, the shop owner lost his oldest son to addiction. The son had been struggling for years, going in and out of treatment centers. After the tragedy, the father spoke publicly about the growing drug crisis and how many families were being destroyed by it. The loss changed him deeply, and he made it part of his mission to raise awareness. His own health had not been easy either. As a child, he suffered from seizures that kept him isolated. He spent much of his childhood stuck indoors, unable to join other kids in sports or games. Instead, he buried himself in books, especially history books, which later shaped his career. As an adult, he eventually partnered with organizations that support people with epilepsy, hoping to help others feel less alone. Not everything in his life was sad. After years of heartbreak, he found companionship again and got engaged during a trip abroad. His new partner had supported him through some of the darkest periods following his son's death. Friends said she brought peace into his life at a time when he needed it most. Unfortunately, fame also brought false rumors. One online video falsely claimed he had been sentenced to life in prison. Fake images were spread, showing him in an orange inmate uniform. The video reached millions before fact-checkers proved it was completely untrue. He laughed it off and posted pictures to prove he was free, but the experience showed how easily lies could spread. Despite the lawsuits, the emotional losses, the health issues, and the impact of the pandemic, he continued working. The business suffered during travel restrictions, and fewer people came to pawn items. Troubles added up, former employees filed suits, partners disagreed, and legal issues came one after another. Even with constant pain in his back, knees, and shoulders, he kept showing up to work. Today, his net worth remains strong, supported by the show, the shop's interest income, real estate, and a growing podcast he runs with a longtime friend. The podcast has already featured several well-known guests and keeps attracting more attention. People who worried he was going bankrupt were proven wrong. He continued collecting classic cars, owning more than 30 of them. Rumors that he was selling them off were false. He simply bought what he liked and passed on deals that didn't feel right. His skills at spotting fakes remain valuable in a world full of scams. He had authenticated ancient coins, rare artwork, and even parts from old space missions. He appeared on financial news programs to discuss gold prices, explaining how even small jewelry pieces had risen in value. Now he is planning to expand the brand internationally, turning the pawn shop's name into a global franchise. The show is currently on break, but he is not slowing down. He continues giving tours, doing interviews, and speaking about the issues that shaped his life: epilepsy, addiction, and resilience. After everything he has faced, family fights, financial battles, false rumors, lawsuits, personal loss, and physical pain, he still stands behind the counter, doing what he has always done, examining the past, studying every detail, and deciding what something is truly worth.